Hello viewers, welcome to my YouTube channel. In this video, I will be taking you through my prediction in paper 3, this year's Kenya Certificate of Secondary Education. On this same channel, I have talked about some of the tips on how to go about the imaginative composition. And paper 3 has 3 questions. And the first question is the imaginative composition. Then we have an essay on compulsory set text, of which this year we expect Henrik Ibsen's A Doll's House. Then lastly, in question 3 of this paper is the optional set text. A candidate is expected to choose from the 3 set books, and that is one that he or she has adequately prepared on. And those 3 set books are: number 1, we have John Steinbeck's The Pearl, we have Inheritance, and lastly, we have the anthology Memories We Lost and Other Stories. So today I will be talking about the question 3, that is the one on the optional set text. And I would want to strongly advise candidates to pick on the anthology question, that is Memories We Lost and Other Stories. Always the points of interpretation are very direct when we come to the short stories. When we look at The Pearl, you realize that the responses ought to be so philosophic, and in many cases covering all the elements and aspects of the question may be a tall order. So I will take you through my prediction on the essay or on the story that I believe will be tested on in this year's Kcse. And I envisage a situation where the candidates are going to be examined on the story, How Much Land Does a Man Need? That is by Leo Tolstoy. And the question that I predict is that greed is insidious, quote unquote. Write an essay validating this statement with clear illustrations from Leo Tolstoy story, How Much Land Does a Man Need? So at the beginning, the candidate will be expected to introduce his or her essay, and in this case, the candidate's introduction needs to show the understanding and interpretation of the question. So minus referring back to the question or repeating the words used in the question, a candidate is expected to paraphrase what he or she understands with the question. And one way of paraphrasing this question would be: selfishness is deeply rooted inside the person who perpetuates it. And this has been clearly illustrated in Leo Tolstoy's story, how much land does a man need? That could be a probable introduction at that point. Then some of the points that the candidate may be expected to expound on in validating the statement that greed is insidious could be drawn from the monologues of greed that have been sprinkled throughout Leo Tolstoy's story. And the story begins when the narrator mentions to us the kind of belongings that Pahom, the main character here, has. He has 123 acres of land. He has a house big enough to hold 5 family members. His farm is doing well. The number of his cattle is also increasing. But then there is this monologue that Pahom has. All day, Pahom kept thinking about only one thing. How can I have more lands? So the nature of greed being insidious is shown when Pahom, despite having all these belongings and wealth, and by the standard of any society, Pahom passes as a wealthy person. But despite all that wealth, all day he kept thinking about only one thing. How can I have more lands? So this kind of thought is always in his mind, is always pushing him on the race of accumulation, the desire for abundance. Then, as he thinks about this, a man arrives to his farm trying to find feed for his horse. He has come from the land of the Bashkirs, and on his arrivals, he says that he has secured 13,000 acres of land, all for 1,000 rubles. So the insidious nature of Pahom's greed also shows when he decisively shows interest in what the dealer from the Bashkirs has told him. And he decisively says to himself that I have to go there and buy land. So his thoughts, the monologue, shows how the selfishness manifests itself in an insidious way. Then finally he makes his way to the land of the Bashkirs. And on arrival, yes, he finds it that to a truth, the piece of land among the Bashkirs is bought for 1,000 rubles as the dealer who branched at his farm site. And the people of the Bashkirs tells him this, that our price is always the same, 1,000 rubles a day. When he asks to know what measure is that, then is told that land here is sold by the day. One can decide to go around or on feet on a day, and the land that he or she has covered belongs to him. But one is expected to start from the spot wherever he or she wants and make his round. Is to take a spade with him and make a mark on the place he has passed. All the land covered shall be his. But there is one condition, that one may make as large a circuit as he pleases, but before the sun sets, he must return to the place where he started. Otherwise, everything becomes invalid. And Pahom delightedly begins this run of death. And later on in another video, I will talk about why I call this a race of death. And the monologue keeps coming back again. And he tells himself, if I walk the whole day, what a large tract I will mark off. I will make a big pasture in my newly acquired land and build a good cottage. So the insider's thoughts, is what really drives Pahom on. And in his quest to accumulate and in his desire for extreme abundance, what really fires him, even during this run of death, is his desire to acquire new land and to build a good cottage to add on to the wealth that he has already accumulated. And as he begins this race, then the incident's conversation with himself continues. And he says, I will get the largest and best land above all the people. I must lose no time. So he is greedy for recognition beyond all others. He is not quite satisfied with what he already has, but he believes that this race for the land is an opportunity for him to acquire a new status of having more land than any other person. There is this time during the run that his conscience seems to be telling him that he now needs to make an about turn and get back to the hillock where the Bashkirs are waiting for him. And at one point, he even fears for his life that in this race for accumulating more land, he can pay the ultimate price by staring at death. So staring at death, there is still this internal conversation with himself that propels him on, and of course propels him towards his grave. And he kept thinking that an hour to suffer, a lifetime to live. So still, this monologue highlights his stoicism and resilience to accumulate more, and the insidious nature of his greed is what propels him to what becomes a tragic at the end. He is also mentally disturbed during this race, and the statement that he keeps thinking about is the statement that had been made to him by the Bashkirs. They told him, before the sun sets, you must return to the place you started, otherwise everything will be invalid. He has moved quite a very long distance, and at this point, distressed, he remembers the words of the Bashkirs. And then he now has to make that long, torturous journey back. And then comes the regret when he realizes that it is mathematically impracticable to get back to the hillock. Then he rules his greed, he rules the selfishness that has propelled him this far. And he says to himself, he thinks, if only I've not blundered trying for too much, what if I am too late? He fears that he may be too late and he may fail to even get hold of his prize, get the piece of land that he wants. And finally, the story ends in a tragedy when Pahom lies dead. Of course, he wins. He gets himself a very large piece of land, but he's not there to enjoy the piece of land as he dies at the end, and his servant picks up a spade, digs a grave long enough for him to lie in, and buries him in it. And he realizes that 6 feet from his head to his heels was all he needed. So a way of handling this essay is by looking at the monologues of greed or selfishness, the thoughts that go on inside Pahom that really cheers him on and propels him in his journey of greed. Then finally, maybe at the conclusion, one may say that in conclusion, just the same way a cancer begins from a single cell, greed and selfishness is also propelled by thoughts. And maybe just to make this rejoinder statement, I could also say that there is this statement, there is this quote that normally goes that, watch your thoughts, they become your words. Watch your words, they become your actions. Watch your actions, they become the character. So greed in this story manifests itself inwardly through the thoughts, and that is what leads to agonizingly terrible consequences for Pahom at the end. Viewers, if you love the content that we are giving here, consider subscribing to my channel and also hit onto that subscribe button so that anytime we produce a video like this, YouTube will automatically notify you. Again, to our supporters, I continue to thank you for your support.